The airport is bustling with the familiar sounds of olfactory tours and rumbles on the floor, loudspeakers announcing flights, and stories told between strangers. In the midst of that explosion, a young girl named Elena Carter stood near the boarding gate, her mysterious eyes filled with joy and battle. This was the first time she flew alone, returning home after a few days of attending a youth leadership conference. The world around her was a symphony of movement and noise, yet in her mind, everything seemed to slow down. She wore a neatly pressed button-down shirt and jeans, clutching a boarding pass and a passport in her hands. Her heart pounded, a mix of excitement and nerves. She knew her father held a significant position in the world, but he had always taught her that a person's worth wasn't measured by their wealth or status, but by their character and how they treated others. Humility costs nothing, he often reminded her. Still, whenever she found herself in a public space where no one recognized who she was, where no one knew she was Elena Carter, the daughter of a powerful man, a wave of unease would creep over her. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that kindness and integrity were the most important things she could carry with her. With a polite smile, Elena approached the gate counter and handed her ticket to the flight attendant. The woman's name tag read Gloria. But instead of returning Elena's smile, Gloria barely acknowledged her, her lips pressed into a tight line as she scanned the boarding pass. Her eyes flickered over Elena's face, pausing briefly at her neatly braided hair, before finally landing on the name printed on the ticket. "Are you traveling alone?" Gloria asked, her tone sharp. "Yes, ma'am," Elena replied softly, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm heading home to see my family." A torn ticket, a shattered dignity, but she wouldn't back down. "I'm going home to see my family," Elena Carter said, her voice calm but firm. The flight attendant, Gloria, gave her a slow, scrutinizing glance from head to toe. There was something cold in her eyes, silent judgment. Elena had encountered looks like this before, the kind that lingered just a second too long, dripping with quiet skepticism. Usually she brushed them off. But this time something felt different. She handed over her passport, waiting for the usual routine: seat verification, identity confirmation. Gloria gave a curt nod, returning the passport, but her fingers lingered on the ticket, studying it as if searching for a flaw. The atmosphere shifted. Something in Gloria's posture turned rigid, defensive. It reminded Elena of the teachers who had doubted her as a child, the ones who always seemed to scrutinize her work more harshly than others. A ripple of unease crept down her spine, but she had no intention of making a scene. Gloria pursed her lips, her gaze snapping back to Elena. "This ticket doesn't look valid." Elena frowned, glancing at the piece of paper in the woman's hand. "It's definitely valid. I confirmed everything before leaving the conference this morning." "It doesn't look valid to me," Gloria repeated, her voice growing louder. Heads turned in their direction, passengers now watching with mild curiosity. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. She knew she had to stay composed. Anger wouldn't help. "This ticket was booked by my father's office," she explained, keeping her voice measured. Gloria scoffed, waving off the explanation with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Sure it was. Don't try to pull a fast one. I've seen plenty of passengers like you trying to sneak onto flights they don't belong on." The words hit Elena like a slap. "Passengers like you?" She knew exactly what that meant. Her father had warned her about moments like this, when people judged first and asked questions later. Still, she kept her voice steady. "I assure you this is a legitimate ticket," she said. "Maybe you could scan it again instead of just checking the system manually?" Gloria let out a sharp laugh, rolling her eyes. A tense silence stretched between them, Elena's heartbeat loud in her ears. Then, without warning, rip. Gloria tore the ticket in half. The sound of shredding paper sliced through the airport noise like a knife. Elena's breath caught. Her eyes widened in shock. "What are you doing?" "That's my ticket." Gloria didn't even flinch. "Move along, little girl. I'm not letting you board with a fraudulent ticket. Go buy another one, if you can afford it." A hush fell over the surrounding passengers. Some murmured to each other, a few looked outraged, and others shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. Elena's face burned, not just with humiliation, but with the kind of simmering anger that made her fingers tremble. She gripped the torn halves of her ticket, trying to swallow the lump forming in her throat. She could call her father right now. He could fix this in minutes. But she hated using his power as a shield. She had always wanted to stand on her own. Still, this was beyond anything she had ever experienced. She had every right to defend herself. Elena took a slow, deep breath, pulled out her phone and dialed. Her father, Michael Carter, answered on the second ring. "Elena?" Is everything okay? You should be boarding by now. Concern laced his voice. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to speak evenly. Dad, there's a problem. The flight attendant said my ticket was fraudulent and she tore it up. Right in front of everyone. Silence. Then her father spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Stay where you are. I'll handle this. She told him her location. Don't move. This will be fixed, he assured her. Elena ended the call, still shaken. She glanced around at the other passengers, some watching her with pity, others avoiding her gaze altogether as if pretending not to notice. She hated causing a scene. She hated drawing attention. But this time she wasn't in the wrong. Across the country, in an office most people could only dream of stepping into, Michael Carter stood up from his desk. He wasn't just a businessman. He was the owner of one of the largest airlines in the country, a company he had built from a small charter service into an empire. More than that, he prided himself on treating his employees and passengers with fairness. Hearing his daughter's shaken voice sent a rare, cold fury through him. He was not a man who flaunted his influence. He believed in letting his work speak for itself. But this crossed every line of decency. He grabbed his phone, made one swift call to his executive assistant, and issued clear, immediate instructions. Then, without another word, he strode out of his office. Normally, Michael Carter carried himself with an air of effortless authority. But today his pace was sharp, his jaw tight. Within minutes, a black luxury sedan was speeding down the highway, heading straight for the airport. And Elena? She stood firm by the gate, refusing to be pushed aside. Gloria might have torn her ticket. But she would soon learn she had just ripped apart the wrong person's dignity. The reckoning, a lesson in accountability. I found the ticket suspicious, sir. I was only trying to protect the integrity of our flights, Gloria said, her voice faltering slightly. Michael Carter remained composed, but his sharp gaze didn't waver. He lifted a hand, silencing any further excuses. You tore up a valid ticket, he said, his tone quiet yet cutting. Even if you had doubts, there was a process to follow. You don't humiliate a passenger. You don't destroy their property. Do you have any idea what you've done? Gloria shifted uncomfortably, her fingers curling slightly as she glanced at Elena but refused to meet her eyes. I did what I thought was right, she stammered. I've seen a lot of counterfeits before. Richard, the supervisor, stepped in, his voice urgent. Mr. Carter, let's move to a private area to resolve this. We don't want a public scene. Elena wanted to protest. She didn't care who was watching. What happened to her deserved to be addressed here where everyone could see. But then she caught the slight nod from her father. He understood the importance of keeping things professional. They followed Richard down a short corridor into a small, sterile staff office behind the check-in desk. A few chairs and a desk sat in the cramped space. Gloria trailed behind, her posture shifting between defiance and apprehension. Michael motioned for Elena to sit before turning to Richard. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority in his words. I'm not here to create unnecessary trouble. But this incident cannot go unaddressed. My daughter was treated unfairly. And just so we're clear, I paid for her ticket in full, through legitimate channels. There is no excuse for an employee to behave like this. Richard wrung his hands together, nodding quickly. I agree, sir. This is unacceptable. On behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize. Gloria opened her mouth as if to defend herself, but no words came out. Elena studied her, feeling a complex mix of anger and disappointment. This was a moment for accountability, a chance for Gloria to truly reflect on her actions. Michael's voice dropped lower, laced with quiet intensity. Our company prides itself on treating all passengers with respect, every passenger. If an employee is acting with bias, it's not just a personal failing. It undermines the core values of this airline. Richard cleared his throat. Yes, sir. We'll take immediate disciplinary action. He then turned to Elena, his face sincerely apologetic. Miss Carter, I am truly sorry. We'll make this right. Elena swallowed past the knot in her throat and nodded. Thank you. I don't like causing trouble, I just want to go home. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, then turned to Gloria. His next words were deliberate, measured. Is there anything you'd like to say to my daughter? Gloria's face tightened, her jaw set. But after a tense pause, a flicker of guilt crossed her features. She let out a shaky breath. I'm sorry if I offended you, she muttered. Elena was silent for a moment, letting the words settle. There was something about the apology that felt more obligatory than genuine. She stole a glance at her father, who gave her a small nod, encouraging her to speak. I accept your apology, she said softly. But I hope you understand the seriousness of what you did. This wasn't just about a ticket. It was about the way you treated me. Gloria pressed her lips together, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the desk. She didn't respond. Maybe she didn't fully grasp the weight of her actions. Maybe she simply refused to admit it. Elena felt a pang of disappointment. She had always believed that people could change when shown the right path. Michael exhaled, drawing the conversation to a close. I trust you'll handle the details, Richard. For now, I want to make sure my daughter can board her flight. Richard nodded hastily, issuing a replacement ticket, this time in first class. He apologized again, promising to follow up. Michael thanked him curtly, without sparing another glance at Gloria. He guided Elena out of the office and back into the terminal. As they walked, he slowed, turning to face her. His expression softened. Are you all right? He asked. That was quite an ordeal. Elena managed a small smile. I'm okay. I guess this is exactly what you warned me about. Michael sighed, shaking his head. That doesn't make it right. And it doesn't make it easy to deal with. They made their way to a quiet airport lounge where they could sit and talk in private. Elena sank into a plush chair, still feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. Across from her, her father folded his hands together, studying her with quiet concern. Your flight leaves soon, he said after a pause. I could fly with you if you'd like. I have a meeting back home anyway. Elena hesitated, then nodded. The thought of having him beside her after everything that had just happened made her feel a little steadier. Within minutes, Michael had arranged for his own ticket. They passed through the gate together. Gloria was nowhere in sight. Richard was there, forcing a polite smile as he wished them a pleasant flight. Other gate agents who had been indifferent before, now seemed overly helpful, directing them toward the jet bridge with eager gestures. Once on board, Elena settled into her first-class seat, the luxury feeling almost unfamiliar. She usually preferred flying economy, choosing to experience the world without the privileges her father's status could afford. But today she accepted the comfort. She needed space to process everything. As the cabin filled with passengers, she felt a shift in the atmosphere. People were noticing her father, recognizing him from business magazines, from interviews. Just an hour ago, she had been treated like she didn't belong. Now, because of who her father was, she was met with subtle nods of deference. It was a jarring reminder of how differently the world treated people based on perceived status. They buckled in. The plane taxied onto the runway, then lifted into the sky. Michael glanced over, offering a reassuring smile. Get some rest, he murmured. It's been a long day. Elena closed her eyes, but her mind raced. Would Gloria face real consequences? Or would this incident fade away, buried in the quiet shuffle of corporate bureaucracy? A part of her felt relief that justice had been served in some way. But another part of her knew the truth. Not everyone gets to call their father and have things fixed. Some people face this kind of treatment every day and no one comes to their rescue. She drifted into a restless sleep, images flashing through her mind, Gloria's cold stare. The sound of her ticket ripping apart. The murmurs of the onlookers. By the time the plane touched down, she felt more exhausted than when she had first boarded. Her father gently touched her shoulder. Come on, he said softly. We're home. They stepped off the plane, the familiar scent of the airport greeting them. A uniformed driver was already waiting. Michael's phone buzzed nonstop with calls and emails, but he ignored them. Right now his focus was on her. As the car sped away from the airport, Elena stared out the window at the city skyline. She found herself thinking, was this where it ended? Should she just move on? Or could she turn this into something more? Michael, as if reading her thoughts, broke the silence. I plan to make sure the airline reviews its policies, he said. No one should be humiliated like that. Elena nodded slowly. I get that. But maybe, there's more we can do. Michael glanced at her curiously. What do you mean? She took a deep breath, her mind buzzing with inspiration from the leadership conference. What if we push for real diversity training? Something that actually makes a difference. Michael's expression shifted into one of genuine interest. Now that, he said, is an idea worth exploring. As the city lights blurred past, Elena exhaled slowly. She had started this journey expecting nothing more than a trip home. But maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something bigger. A significant step, from adversity to change. The training program was not only designed to increase employee satisfaction, reduce turnover rates, and enhance the airline's reputation, but it also included real-life stories to drive its impact. However, Amara chose to leave her name out of the official narrative of the incident, focusing instead on the broader issue. It was a delicate balance. She wanted to be an advocate for change without making herself the center of attention. Finally, the big day arrived, the day Amara and Jonathan would present their proposal to a panel of senior board members. As they stepped into the sleek conference room on the top floor of the airline's headquarters, Amara felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. Around 6 board members were present, along with a few senior executives. When Jonathan entered, everyone stood in respect, but he quickly redirected the attention to Amara, explaining that she was the one leading this initiative. Amara took her seat at the head of the table with her father beside her. Taking a deep breath, she began. Her voice was clear and confident as she outlined the key points of the plan. She explained the real-world consequences of discrimination, emphasizing how it harmed not only passengers but also the airline's brand. She stressed that a forward-thinking, values-driven training program could position the airline as a model of excellence and inclusion. Some board members nodded in agreement, while others flipped through the proposal documents, their expressions unreadable. One board member, Cynthia, an older woman with a sharp gaze, raised pointed questions about the costs and feasibility of the program. Amara listened carefully before responding with well-prepared answers, citing research and industry data her team had compiled. Jonathan stepped in to offer a financial perspective, emphasizing that the program was an investment, one that would protect the airline's reputation and attract more customers in the long run. The meeting lasted over an hour. Finally, Cynthia gave a small, thoughtful nod. "This is ambitious, but I see its value. We'll discuss it further at the full board meeting." Jonathan shook hands with the executives, thanking them for their time. Amara exhaled, feeling a wave of relief. This wasn't the final victory, but it was an important first step. As they walked out of the building, her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice warm with sincerity. "No matter what the board decides, you made a strong case for change." She smiled, tension easing from her shoulders. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done this without your support." Jonathan patted her shoulder. "This is just the beginning." Justice served. In the days that followed, the airline's internal investigation continued. Richard kept Jonathan updated. Gloria had been placed on unpaid leave while the company reviewed security footage, passenger complaints, and past reports. As it turned out, Elena was not the first person to raise concerns about Gloria's behavior. Jonathan remained neutral, allowing the process to unfold properly. But deep down, he wanted to ensure that Gloria would never humiliate another passenger again. As for Amara, life gradually returned to normal. She attended classes, met up with friends, and worked on extracurricular activities. But something inside her had changed. That humiliating moment at the airport had ignited a fire within her. She knew that once the board made its decision, she would be there to see the initiative through. The final decision. One afternoon, as Amara was studying, she heard her father call from downstairs. She set aside her textbooks and rushed down, finding him by the front door, phone in hand. "It's Richard," he said quietly. "He wants to speak with you." Amara's heart pounded as she took the phone, greeting Richard politely. His voice sounded lighter, almost relieved. "I wanted to let you know that after a thorough investigation, the airline has decided to terminate Gloria's employment. There was clear evidence of multiple discriminatory incidents in the past." Amara was silent for a few moments, processing the news. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel pity. She simply felt that justice had been served. She thanked Richard for letting her know. He continued, "We also presented your training proposal to the full board. There's a lot of enthusiasm for it. The final vote will take place next week, but it's looking very promising." A spark of excitement flickered in Amara's chest. "That's good to hear. I hope this program makes a real difference." Richard's voice was firm. "I believe it will. It's unfortunate that it took an incident like yours for us to act, but I'm grateful you didn't stay silent." They ended the call. Amara handed the phone back to her father. He studied her expression. "How do you feel?" She took a slow breath. "Bittersweet. I don't want anyone to lose their job, but what she did was wrong. At least now, the company seems serious about fixing the problem." Jonathan nodded, his gaze understanding. "Your empathy is one of your greatest strengths. But remember, accountability matters too. You handled this with grace." She offered him a small smile. "Let's see what happens next week." Turning an incident into a movement. The day of the board vote arrived faster than Amara had expected. She dressed professionally and accompanied her father to the airline's headquarters. This time the boardroom was larger, filled with more executives and directors. The air was thick with anticipation. Finally, the chairman of the board addressed the room. Today, we will vote on whether to implement this training program across the entire airline. He gestured toward Amara, inviting her to speak. Her heart pounded, but she took a deep breath and stood. This program is not just about preventing discrimination, it's about creating a workplace culture of empathy, accountability, and respect, benefiting employees, passengers, and the airline's reputation as a whole. The room fell silent as the board members absorbed her words. Then the vote began. One by one, hands raised in favor. Amara scanned the room, heart racing. A few hesitant hands remained, but eventually even they went up. The motion passed with overwhelming support. A wave of relief and pride washed over Amara. The chairman smiled. We will move forward with the development and rollout of this program as soon as possible. Mr. Carter, Amara, we'd like to coordinate with you on the next steps. After the meeting, several executives approached Amara to shake her hand, expressing their enthusiasm for the initiative. She felt validated. What had once been a moment of public humiliation had now sparked a meaningful corporate transformation. And she hoped it would set a precedent, not just for this airline but for the entire industry. The journey was just beginning. As they left the boardroom, Jonathan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Well done, he murmured. This is going to help a lot of people. She looked up at him, grateful for his unwavering support. Thanks, Dad. I'm just glad we're making progress. They headed back to the car. Amara gazed at the towering city skyline, reflecting on how quickly life could change. One day she had been just another passenger. The next, she had become an unexpected catalyst for corporate change. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. And deep down she knew. This was only the first chapter. There was still so much more work to be done. The spark of change. The training program was implemented company-wide, including top executives, ground staff, pilots, and flight attendants. Amara took a moment to reflect on how much had changed since the day Gloria had ripped her ticket apart. She thought about how a single act of cruelty had opened the door for dialogue and action. That same week, Amara and Jonathan were invited to an employee gathering at an airport lounge, where staff who had completed the pilot training would share their experiences. Amara was both nervous and excited to meet the real people behind the statistics she had been tracking. When they arrived, the room was filled with employees from various departments, all wearing name tags. Some recognized Amara and approached her with words of gratitude or curious questions. One flight attendant, Maria, admitted that she had initially doubted the need for such training. I always thought I treated everyone equally, Maria said. But the sessions made me realize that sometimes, our unconscious biases affect the way we interact with passengers. I caught myself being more short-tempered with people who reminded me of a difficult passenger I once had. Amara nodded, listening attentively. I'm glad the program helped you see that. Maria smiled. Yes, and now I'm much more mindful of how I treat people, especially when I feel myself making quick judgments. Thank you for championing this. A security officer named Malik also spoke up, sharing how he appreciated the practical tips on de-escalation and empathy. I've seen a lot of tension in airports, Malik said. People are stressed, worried about flights, luggage, missing connections. Misunderstandings escalate quickly. This training gave me new tools to handle those situations. Hearing these testimonials warmed Amara's heart. At one point, laughter rippled through the room as employees exchanged stories about awkward moments on the job. It was a stark contrast to the hostility she had faced at the boarding gate that day. She realized that for every Gloria, there were dozens of employees who genuinely wanted to do better. A meaningful conversation. Toward the end of the gathering, Richard, the supervisor who had handled Amara's complaint, approached. He looked much more at ease than when they had first met. It's been quite a journey, he said with a smile. I never imagined we'd be here launching this company-wide. But I'm glad we are. Amara returned his smile. Me too. He hesitated for a moment before asking, I heard you'll be starting college soon. Any idea what you want to major in? She shrugged lightly. I'm considering business, maybe with a minor in social impact or something similar. I want to continue this kind of work, whether in my father's company or somewhere else. Richard nodded approvingly. The world could use more leaders like you. She blushed slightly at the compliment and thanked him. From across the room, Amara spotted her father engaged in a lively discussion with a group of employees. He laughed wholeheartedly at a story someone shared. A wave of affection and gratitude washed over her. He had always taught her to stand up for herself, and for others, when something was wrong. As the evening drew to a close, the crowd began to thin. Jonathan and Amara prepared to leave. On their way out, a manager pulled Jonathan aside for a quick question, leaving Amara standing near the exit alone. She turned to take in the sight of the busy airport terminal beyond the lounge windows. Flights were arriving and departing, announcements echoing over the PA system. A quiet sense of closure settled over her. The fight for equality and fair treatment was far from over, but she had found a tangible way to contribute. An unexpected thank you. Sensing someone behind her, Amara turned. An older flight attendant stood there. She hadn't been part of the official gathering, but her neatly pressed uniform and warm expression spoke volumes. "I heard about what happened to you," the woman said softly. "I just wanted to say I'm so sorry you went through that. And I'm grateful for what you're doing." She paused, then added, "Most of us do our best to welcome passengers with kindness. We hate to see someone tarnish our profession." Amara's eyes glistened with emotion. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "And thank you for your work. I know that most flight attendants are dedicated and caring." The woman gave a small nod before quietly walking away, disappearing into the bustling corridor. Amara took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. A new flame was lit. From a torn ticket to a company-wide initiative, this journey had taken Amara through a whirlwind of emotions: anger, humiliation, fear, hope, and now, cautious optimism. Her father finished his conversation and returned, gently placing a hand on her back. "Ready to go home?" She smiled. "More than ready." They stepped out together, merging into the steady hum of the airport. What they had accomplished lingered in the air around them, like an invisible banner of hope. Not everyone would change overnight. Not every passenger's experience would suddenly become perfect. But they had ignited a spark. And Amara believed that when nurtured, sparks could grow into lasting flames. What did this story mean to you? Did you enjoy this story of ambition, courage, and the power of one voice to spark change? Let us know in the comments which part resonated with you the most or which character's journey surprised you. And if you want more inspiring stories full of twists, heart, and transformation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's plenty more where this came from, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. A new flame was lit. From a torn ticket to a company-wide initiative, this journey had taken Amara through a whirlwind of emotions: anger, humiliation, fear, hope, and now, cautious optimism. Her father finished his conversation and returned, gently placing a hand on her back. "Ready to go home?" She smiled. "More than ready." They stepped out together, merging into the steady hum of the airport. What they had accomplished lingered in the air around them, like an invisible banner of hope. Not everyone would change overnight. Not every passenger's experience would suddenly become perfect. But they had ignited a spark. And Amara believed that when nurtured, sparks could grow into lasting flames. What's next? But this is only the beginning. Amara has taken her first step toward creating real change, but what happens next? Will the airline's new training program truly transform its corporate culture? Will Amara face new challenges as she moves into the next chapter of her life? And what about the people still resisting change? One thing is certain: the fight for fairness and respect is far from over. Stay tuned for part 2, where Amara's journey continues, stronger, bolder, and with even higher stakes. What did this story mean to you? Did you enjoy this story of ambition, courage, and the power of one voice to spark change? Let us know in the comments which part resonated with you the most or which character's journey surprised you. And if you want more inspiring stories full of twists, heart, and transformation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's plenty more where this came from, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey.